I'm honored to be here, particularly with like-minded people. So I'll try to avoid, things that overlap too much. Um, I had a piece I wrote, and I'm trying to rewrite it, called "The World in Which We Live," and it's quite different from the discourse about the world in which we think we live. And there are three elements. The first one won't belabor it, is complexity. In other words, we have a lot more interaction. We discovered that during COVID, but now we're discovering this military implication that, ironically, people involved in decision making didn't realize, which is that the whole idea that the trader saying is that the market is like a large movie theater with a very small door. So and the sucker focuses on the theater, not on the door. So what happens that now we discover there's a small door, Hormuz, and Hormuz, and you end up by fighting someone, you may end up fighting yourself, which is because of interactions. So hopefully people will understand it at some point, and it will lead to less aggression and more peace. That's the first point, is complexity. A lot of other ramification covered here. The second point is very counterintuitive about growth, that growth follows an S curve. You see, it's very easy to grow when you're in Africa. All you have to do is build a post office or have a water fountain, and you generated growth. You generated GDP growth. And then and then it's an S, so it goes up in a convex way, and then it slows down and becomes concave. In other words, you got to do a lot to generate growth. When I'm using benchmark since you mentioned. For me, I used 2007 as a marker, so it's 19 years ago when I published. When my main books started having an impact. Is China was 6% of world GDP, and I use a PPP of the IMF. The United States and Europe were about roughly what we call Europe today, or the EU today, but adjusted for members, about each or about in the 20% of GDP, world GDP. And of course, we take a country like Turkey, 1% of GDP, world GDP, the UK, and France, each about 3.4% of world GDP. Today, we're talking about 19 years later. China is in the 20s, and if people are fighting, or whether it's 22 or 27% world GDP, depending on how you count prices. US and Europe are in a 14, 15% of world GDP each. Turkey was 1% of world GDP, now is more than 2.25%. And France and the UK are about the size of Turkey, approximately, depending how you count. So you realize the dynamics and what's happening with that S curve of growth, not counting population, not counting anything, is that you need to grow when you have that problem. Is and the problem, if you look at the countries on the top of the S curve, they're the countries that have the most debt. And they don't realize that the past growth was due to the fact that you had development. And once people have a two-car garage, 1.3, 2.3 children and 1.1 pet or something like that, or 0.9 of a pet or something, the growth is going to be much more difficult. Hence immigration. Europe, I mean, I ride a bicycle around, and I did an experiment. I looked at workers, because you see nothing but workers in suburban neighborhoods. Not one of them was a native English speaker, and I let you guess what language it was here in the US. In Europe, I mean, they are addicted to cheap labor to clean their bathrooms, um, work in restaurants, to do the low paying jobs.
30
So,
seconds, Nassim.
sorry?
30 seconds,
Yeah,
Nassim.
okay. So we have that problem of, so this is why they take immigrants basically not just because they need this, but because that generates growth. You bring someone from poverty, and then they have a chance to move into something like lower middle class generating growth. So the world in which we live has one main characteristic, that it has this low growth, high debt S curve with a lot of complexity and a whole spate of risks that are not in discourse, but we can infer just from working from these basic facts. Thank you for listening to me.